I will do the America verse. May our feeling penetrate into the center of our heart and seek in love to unite with human beings seeking the same goal. With spirit beings who, full of grace, behold our earnest, heartfelt striving, strengthening us from realms of light and illuminating our love. So, Gail, you are next.
Yes. Yes. Well, I have the pleasure of welcoming Robert back to the Faust branch. We enjoyed your presentation last time and we're delighted you're here again. Just a few things about Robert. He's been a student of Rudolf Steiner's ever since he was 17. As you probably know, he lives in Toronto, Canada, where he's, of course, a member of the Anthroposophical Society there. And he lectures and conducts workshops on meditation and other topics. His day job is actually in healthcare management, but he's also the chair of the board of directors of the Rudolf Steiner College in Canada. And I've had the pleasure of working with Robert as a colleague of Bruce and mine in the Council for the Literary Arts section of the and Humanities section for the School of Spiritual Science. And tonight he's going to share with us his thoughts on how to live as a meditant in the current world. Thank you, Robert.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation. So I wanted to start off with a bit of an interaction with you all, and to ask you, in a sense, how are you feeling about the world as it is unfolding around us? Obviously not looking for hour-long lectures, but just some comments about how you're feeling. And so I'll just throw it open to anybody who wants to make a quick comment about what is it like to be you in the contemporary world? What impression is it making upon you? How does it live with you? And that kind of thing.
So yeah, feel free to unmute and share your thought.
It's the 1960s all over again.
Can you say a bit more about that?
Just the same feeling about the turbulence and change and reformation. I mean, it's like there's a whole ball of fire going on, and there's going to be some changes at the end of it. I mean, we're already going through them. So yeah, thanks.
I would say in the 1960s, I felt that I could do something. This, I feel more overwhelmed and a little less certain about what I can do other than take care of the children and work in the garden. I wonder, how do I stand up against ice, or, other than sing with my friends on the corner on Brunswick, or, and then do my inner work. But I feel like there's something more that I need to do, and it causes a certain anxiousness, I guess, or uncertainty.
Thank you, Helena. Just jump in, whoever wants to go next.
Two things that occur to me are that back in 1985, when I was at the Waldorf Institute in Detroit, at the beginning of our year of the teacher training, we had some keynote addresses by a number of speakers. And Werner Gloss, the director of the Institute, began his by saying that what we were facing was a battle over the image of the human being. And certainly 40 years later, with AI and singularity and all, number of things we see about how people are affected by technology, that seems to really have become more clear than it was in 1985. And to speak to Helena's point a bit, Nancy Poor, who lives nearby here, in most of our conversations, she comes around to telling me, well, Peter, we just have to be a warrior for Michael in every single thing we say and do.
Thanks, Peter.
Hi, I'm noticing for me, very similar what others have shared, but just a lot of different feelings, from alarm, like sometimes feeling very alarmed, very concerned, easily upset when someone shares information that they've gotten from their AI. And on the other hand, it's also showing me it's a really rich time to do more deeper practice on my own staying grounded and being compassionate to others. And like the other lady, I struggle with what can I do, but I almost feel like maybe letting go of that demand of myself, kind of letting go. There's something way bigger than what I, even really understand, I think. But yeah, it's very, very challenging. And yet I am safe. I have enough, and it's like getting balanced with it all, like knowing I'm okay in this moment, but many others aren't, and how to be with that.
Let me take one or two more comments. There's someone else who feels like sharing. Thank you, Mary.
I'm not really sure what's going on in the world right now. I feel like it is a turning point, and that's just a sense of feeling. I wake up each morning and write, and I ask, to be able to, whatever I write, even though it's poetry, that it expresses what's going on. And I really trust that. A lot of it is a little bit of turmoil, but I find that in the writing, that going through that creative activity, I can find resolution in that, always at the end of a poem or at the end of a period of time doing creative work. There's something that resolves it. I think using the limbs in a creative way, if there's nothing else that we can do, that just using our hands in a creative way really does affect what's going on in the world in a positive way. And then when I go into town, I see all these people and I just connect with them. So I'm seeing there in the moment when you look and you talk and there's a light that comes up, and none of it's esoteric necessarily. But in finding those conversations, and most of them aren't actually even mundane, that there's not only a joy in it, but I feel like a really beauty in it. So I'm finding in my life and what's around me, a lot of beauty and peace and humanity.
It's wonderful, Nicholas. It's wonderful that you have an artistic life as well. That certainly can be extraordinarily helpful. Well, look, let's leave it there. Feel free to jump in as I'm talking today. So, don't hesitate to put up your hand or just ask a question. Doesn't have to be so structured. I think probably all of you would agree, and I certainly heard this in many comments, that there's a lot in the world right now that is disturbing. There's a lot of things that are brought into our consciousness that are, in one way or another, disturbing. And so trying to be a meditant, trying to be someone who's working towards the birth of their higher self in the context of a disturbing environment sets us with a certain kind of challenge. I'll be frank with you about listening to Donald Trump. It's not uncommon for me to find myself in a fantasy where I'm telling the guy off. and this is not a really wholesome place to be in my imagination, speaking to somebody like that. But it's a reaction to the level of frankly, dishonesty that I sometimes hear from him. He's not the only one, others as well. But that kind of the way in which the outer world reaches in and causes us to be disturbed is something that I think the meditant in the modern age has to take seriously. It is one of the challenges of striving to develop higher consciousness in the current situation that we're in. One of the things that I have tried to do, and it's not a complete effort, I'll share it with you now, but I've tried to say, well, Rudolf Steiner, as the leading initiate of our time, the one who stepped into the public light anyway, he's not a perfect human being, but he does offer us a kind of a template of what somebody who's been able to unfold higher consciousness is like. And so I try to think a little bit about his personality, not so much the unique aspects of his personality, but some of the strengths that he was able to develop and unfurl. And just before I get into some of my thoughts about that, one of the things that I've been learning about in anthroposophy for some time now is this wonderful paradox of how, as we develop as human beings, there's a way in which we become more similar, and there's a way in which we become more unique. And it's an interesting juxtaposition or polarity. In a certain way, we become more similar in that we have similar kinds of, you could say, compassionate responses and loving responses to other people in the world around us. You might find that people who have strived to take the anthroposophical path are more likely to have veneration for truth and knowledge, or more likely to have a sense of ongoing gratitude, or more likely to have a kind of inner activity or inner agency that they're working to develop. And in some ways, this makes us similar. But on the other side, as we develop individually, we end up being increasingly more uniquely ourselves. And it's an interesting polarity in the path of human development. I come to think of us kind of like as if we're each developing our own instrument. So, one person is becoming a trumpet, another person's becoming a tuba. But when we get together, because of the aspects that pull us into togetherness, we can play, as an orchestra. We can cooperate more effectively because of the ways in which we're similar. It's just a picture of individual development. Now, when you look at an initiate's response to a disturbing world, a couple of things come to mind that I think are worth thinking about. One is an initiate has a direct experience of the spiritual world, and that provides an enormous amount of meaning to that person's life. One thing that we all have to do is create a narrative with ourselves in that narrative that gives us a meaningful life. And an initiate has struggled through to a very rich narrative of the nature of the human being and his or her own place in the unfolding and development of humanity. So this developed understanding of the world around us, providing a meaningful narrative, does a lot of the work to enable us to then find the resources to meet the disturbances in the world. The other thing that's maybe not so obvious, but is very important, is the nuanced degree of self-care that an initiate deals with. So an initiate is involved in various ways in constantly strengthening him or herself. And this is done in relationship, obviously, with the spiritual world, but also with an understanding that the initiate needs the constant strengthening involved. One example of this would be that Rudolf Steiner, about 5 times a day, would say out loud his version of the Lord's Prayer in quite a booming voice that you could hear all through the Goetheanum or later on through the Schreinerei. And this was an activity of revitalizing his forces throughout the day. He wasn't doing it just to, uh, uh, I don't know, to perform for other people. He was doing it out loud for himself to reconnect to the source of power that he needed for the rest of his day. So part of the initiate, then the first part is this, deep understanding of the world and making sense of what's in it. But the second is this attention to this the essentially self-care of what's required for that individual to stay in touch with moral forces in himself. The third thing that comes to mind is compassion. And I think it's really useful to distinguish between compassion and empathy. At first, they might seem to be the same thing, but when I was studying to become a psychotherapist, one of my teachers, a man who I never really got along with, said, no, empathy doesn't have anything to do with moral goodness. It's an intellectual capacity to understand the feeling life of another, and a torturer can be very empathic. And I thought, whoa, that's not my understanding of the word. But I've come to realize that empathy in and of itself, although I don't agree with his description, is not the same as compassion. And that compassion implies moving beyond simply a capacity to feel what the other is feeling, but also then moves into the desire to help in some way, to alleviate the suffering. So compassion means, with the feeling of the other, but it implies a certain kind of agency. Somebody who has compassion is not just somebody who has empathy, but somebody who wants to then, based on the empathic connection, do something about it in some way. I see compassion as something that has leads us towards a kind of creative engagement to help others. And that's the last thing that I would say about the initiate's response to disturbing times, that they then develop a life that's oriented towards what really is of eternal value in human life. And each of us, I think, has to find our own pathway there. I don't think it means that we all have to be on the front lines of every demonstration. In fact, I think it's as wide as life, the way that we find out how we can be most useful to the intimate circle of people around us and to the wider circles that we participate in. I'm not saying we shouldn't go to demonstrations, but I think that we have to be nuanced in our understanding of what we can bring to the world. And I heard a couple of people in tonight's talk saying, on the one hand, am I doing the right thing? Am I finding my way of being creatively engaged in helping humanity? And other people feeling, yes, I am finding my way. Here's my way. I think having the courage to ask that question of ourselves and then try to find an answer that is unique for ourselves is also part of the way that the initiate responds to troubling times. Now, of course, when you look at an ideal like an initiate, obviously, there's lots of room for growth and development in each of us. But I think when it comes to moral development, we have these kind of three tasks. We have to develop ideals, moral ideals. And then we have to do the hard work of assessing ourselves against those ideals. And then lastly, we have to say, okay, well, I can see the gap. What can I do? What action or change in behavior or development can I take that will move me forward? And as you probably all know, in Knowledge of the Higher Worlds, Rudolf Steiner gives what he calls the golden rule of the meditant. And that is, for every step in spiritual development, take 3 steps in the development of your character. I'm going to be transparent with you about where I'm at with that. First of all, when we first read that, we tend to read it as a kind of ratio. We tend to say, well, I need to try harder at my personal development than I am at my spiritual development. But I think for a meditant, you have to go further than that. You have to actually make it specific. What are your three things that you need to work on? Crystal clearly articulated to yourself. What is the one thing in spiritual development that you're trying to achieve at this time? So I'm at the risk of embarrassing myself. I'm going to tell you my three right now are not lying, not engaging in various lustful behaviors like eating too much. You know, you're talking to a man who still weighs 240 pounds and needs to lose another. I was 300, I'm now 240, so progress, but I still need to lose basically 50 pounds, which if you see a 50-pound dog, that's a lot of dog. Anyway, I'm not sure where there is that big of a hound here on me, but that's the goal. So lying, I'm a good storyteller, and as one, I think it was Mark Twain who said, every good story deserves embellishment. But if you're going to be a meditant, actually, you have to be very careful. It's one thing to say, I'm now going to tell you a fictional story, then you can do whatever you want. But if you're adding to things that are supposed to be true with bits and pieces of lying, you're off the path. So, lying, lustful behavior, and laziness, not doing tasks when I really ought to, giving in too much to the love of comfort. So those three are the three that I'm working on right now. And the one step I'm trying to make as a meditant is to remember that I am a meditant from when I wake up in the morning to when I go to bed at night. And I frequently have clearly forgotten, for stretches of time that I'm supposed to be trying to be conscious or moral or aware or what have you. So, but I put it forward to you that if you're going to be a meditant, if you're going to take the path of knowledge seriously, this golden rule needs to become specific for you. And I think that that's usually not that hard. If you sit on the edge of your bed at night and ask yourself, okay, how am I screwing things up? Or where do I have my biggest challenges? Usually it's not terribly hard to focus in on them. And then, of course, you go back to this process of, okay, what's the ideal? Okay, how do I assess myself against the ideal? And then lastly, what action can I take or change in behavior can I take that would move me toward the ideal? So I just offer that as a bit of a schema for moral development because I think if you're going to be a meditant, you have to take the development of your character seriously. And I think that is something that we don't talk about very often with each other. And I think it's something that we need to be able to talk with each other about if we're going to be a community of meditants. Most of what I want to talk about tonight is how does the meditant, the average anthroposophist who's decided that they want to take the path of knowledge, move toward the kind of integrated and potent response that an initiate has to troubling times. And I think that for me, that takes me back to some of the foundational practices in the anthroposophical path. And that's what I'd like to spend tonight's time on mostly, is going back over and sharing with you my understanding of those practices. And we might actually even do a bit of them together here if there's an interest or willingness to do that. The first thing I would say, and this is a kind of a slogan that I've developed, the student of the path has to become a student of the path. And what I mean by that is if you're going to be a meditant, if you're going to take this seriously, then you have to actually become somebody who studies how the anthroposophical path works. How does it change you? What effects does this exercise do? What effect does that exercise have? How do the exercises combine? Why does it matter if you do the exercises in this order or that order, et cetera, et cetera? in a funny way, it's a little bit like saying if you want to be a baseball player, you have to study the rules. There's a whole number of aspects of anthroposophy that feed into the meditant's picture of what it is they're trying to do. So, for example, you might think about the meditant trying to understand that what they're trying to do is develop higher forms of cognition, going from the kind of cognition we're all experiencing now to imaginative cognition and inspirational cognition and intuitive cognition. You might also think about the fact that as a meditant, what you're trying to do is develop chakra consciousness, which is another way of talking about the emergence of new forms of cognition, trying to develop the heart chakra, the chakra in the region of the larynx, the chakra at the base of the nose, etc., etc. And you might also start to think about the fact that what you're trying to do is develop out of the consciousness soul the essential infrastructure of the spirit self and eventually life spirit and spirit human. But most of us right now are working at the elaboration of the spirit self out of the consciousness soul. So important to realize those are the same thing from different points of view. This is one of the areas where you can really understand that Steiner really brings us things from different points of view, and you have to do the hard work then of trying to integrate them. But the emergence of spirit self from consciousness soul, the development of chakra consciousness, and the capacity for imaginative cognition, these are all actually the same thing from different perspectives. So in studying anthroposophy, I find that you go through what I've come to call for myself confusion and consolidation cycles. In other words, I'll read something for a while and I'll think, oh, I'm getting this. I see how this all fits together. That's wonderful. And then I'll pick up a next lecture series and it's like, oh, Gewalt, I don't understand how this fits in at all. What is he talking about? And so you go through these cycles of confusion and consolidation and confusion and consolidation. But I think that is actually an essential part of the struggle of being an anthroposophist. And if you're going to be a meditant, you have to engage in an ever deepening study of anthroposophy because that's the only way to understand what it is you're trying to do as a meditant. The meditative path fits inside the larger picture of human evolution that anthroposophy provides. If you don't have that larger picture, you won't be able to understand how it is the exercises are changing you and won't actually even be able to do them properly. So again, the student of the path has to become a student of the path, which means being a student of anthroposophy. The next sort of fundamental exercise that Rudolf Steiner starts knowledge of the higher worlds with is the path of veneration, of devotion to truth and knowledge. And he says that of this path, a person has to do it assiduously. And that's not a word he uses very often, and he's very careful in his choice of words. I find more and more as I study him, I realize how very careful he is in his choice of words. Even with the vagaries of multiple translations, you can see his care in his use of words. Assiduously, as you all know, means really, 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 really hard. If you're serious about being a meditant, you have to be practicing the path of veneration every single day, ideally multiple times a day. How do you do it? It's actually pretty easy. It's a two-sided meditation. On the positive side, you need to find something in your environment that you can think thoughts about, and those thoughts, as you think them, will lead to a bloom of feeling in your heart. And that bloom of feeling will be in response to the knowledge content or capability content you're thinking about in your mind. So you're walking down the street and you see a brick house and you pause to notice how beautifully the bricks were set above the window, how they made an arc shape, which is not so easy a thing to do with completely rectangular bricks. But the bricklayer knew how to do that, and so you see this beautiful shape. Well, if you pause for a second and think, there's a certain skill required of a bricklayer in knowing how to arrange that so that the arc shape over the window has the kind of perfect curve to it. even though he's working with completely rectangular shapes. And so you can think of the skill and capacity of the bricklayer. If you do that energetically enough in your thought life for a second, what will emerge in your heart is a feeling of probably something like respect or admiration for the craftsman's skill in that moment. In another situation, you might see, if you're quick enough to see it, a moment where, for example, a teacher does something very deft for a child that helps calm the child or enable the child to regain composure and play with others or something like that. You'll see a moment of kind of soul warmth that stabilizes a child. If you're quick enough to catch something like that and recognize in your mind what you're seeing, you might well have the bloom of something like reverence for the skill of the teacher in that moment. So if you're going to take the path of veneration, you have to be doing this inner work, I don't know, 5 times a day. Like it has to be something you're working at every day. And correspondingly, you have to watch for cynical rejection of things that deserve value. I'll give you an example from my own life. When I was a boy, I was much more inward than outward. And as a result, I had a couple of, I think the universe trying to wake me up in a couple of sort of funny ways. I was riding my bike in a small town where I lived, and twice in a period of about 8 months, I ran into a parked car. And it wasn't like the car swerved in front of me. There was the car, I'm riding my bike, there's the car, bang, right into it. Not really awake to the world around me, you know. I think the world was trying to like wake me up a little bit. But because I have that more inward than outward nature, when I learned to drive, I really didn't like highways. The speed of the highway, the fact that a simple error could cause serious damage. Also, I thought they were kind of ugly. So I carried with me this idea that highways are ugly and bad. And when I started to do the path of veneration, one of the things you can do is go through your consciousness for anything that you find that is disparaging of the world and have a look at it. So when I had a look at my disparaging attitude toward highways, I thought, well, what do I really know about a highway? Very little. So I researched highways. I learned the incredible efficiency of the use of materials. I learned how highway construction had developed to such a high degree of capacity that we can have these long, long, long roads. I learned how carefully the highway designers plan the steepness of curves based on the speed. I learned a bit about how people who have to deal with cities have to figure out all how the highways interact and how they connect and all the human intelligence that goes into designing a highway system. And so this led me to have a sense of admiration for highways. Now, I still think they're dangerous and ugly. So the path of veneration isn't asking you to give up on your criticisms where those criticisms have some validity to them. But what it's asking you to do is understand the thing in its whole context so that you're no longer rejecting or cynically looking down on something that does have value. Now, Steiner goes on to explain that this activity of cultivating this fundamental attitude of soul, of veneration and devotion, awakens cognitive powers in the meditant. Your soul becomes riper for learning about deeper truths of life as a result of having done this. Now, I learned something recently. I was presenting on the path of veneration, and I called it the fundamental mood. And then I went back and looked at knowledge of the higher worlds, and I realized he doesn't use the word mood. He uses the word attitude. And there's a very important difference between having an attitude towards something and being in a certain mood. An attitude represents something that you deliberately have chosen and is likely to influence your behavior. An attitude may not always be deliberately chosen, but in this case, one is deliberately choosing to develop the attitude of veneration for truth and knowledge. Importantly, when we think about truth and knowledge, we might tend to think of it too academically. Truth and knowledge in this regard means wherever the spirit of truth is shining through human endeavor. And that can be anything from somebody being kind to someone else, somebody being sensitive to someone else, somebody being artistic and doing something beautiful. All of these things can be understood as the spirit of truth shining through the human being. And wherever we see the spirit of truth shining through the human being, that's where we need to work in our thinking to produce a bloom of feeling in our hearts. Now, sometimes you get the bloom of feeling without having to do any of the hard work of thinking. That's a gimme. That's great. It's good. Don't look a gift horse in the mouth. But that's not enough to mean that you have developed this attitude towards truth and knowledge. And you can see that everything you do in the anthroposophical path changes you, but simultaneously changes your relationship with the spiritual world. So taking the path of veneration changes you, deepens your soul, gives it more capacity for deeper understanding. But it is also starting to heal your relationship with the spirit of truth. You're starting to move closer to a kind of saturation of the spirit of truth with your inner being. You're starting to develop the capacity through which you will be able to throw off the many compromises to falsehood that you currently live with. So that's the foundational part of the path that any meditant has to take seriously. And I think that it's easy to skip over this in anthroposophy. I think I'm going to have to connect to another power source. One sec. I think it's easy to skip over how much work has to go in to cultivating the path of veneration, to getting to the point where the warmth and the light that come from the path of veneration really saturate your soul. Sorry, the light here is not that great. Let me see if I can find a way that I doesn't look like I'm, yeah. It all makes me look like I'm gonna have a halo here. Hang on a second. Yeah, that's a bit better. Okay, so let me just grab my paper. The next fundamental thing, and we're just in chapter 1, Knowledge of the Higher Worlds, is what Bodo von Plato calls cultivating inner culture. This means basically awakening to the nuance of your experience, both on the realm of the senses and the inner realm of feeling and imagination. We have to do this. Is, by the way, all of the thoughts that are contained in contemporary psychology under the term mindfulness fit right here in anthroposophy. Cultivating inner culture is, in a sense, mindfulness, paying attention to nuance in the outer world and the inner world. Now, if you have a friend who's an artist and you're walking through the forest and you say the trees are green, your friend, the artist, is likely to look at you and go, yeah, but about 17 different shades of green, which they may be more alive to than you are, for example. So there's outer nuance and inner nuance. I'm going to give you an example of inner nuance. This is a little exercise you'll have to do with me, if you're willing. First of all, I'd like you to remember a door that you know well. Door to your room, door to the house. What color is it? How many panels does it have? What's the doorknob like? Just spend a moment trying to remember a door you know well. Okay. Now, I'd like you to imagine a door you haven't seen before. Make it up, whatever color and shape you want. In both experiences, you had a mental image of a door, but in one you were remembering and the other you were imagining. How do you know the difference? This is a question of inner nuance. You all well know how to do the one or the other. But if I ask you, how do you know the difference? It's not so easy to put it into words. The experience of remembering in some way feels different than the experience of imagining. But it's not so easy to define exactly how. This is an inner experience that we don't often think about the difference of. But it's an example of inner nuance. Now, Rudolf Steiner gives us a meditation for cultivating inner culture, and I've always been a bit surprised by this meditation. You can basically describe it as listening to past enjoyments, using the word enjoyment here to mean sort of any human experience that you've had. So falling and breaking your wrist could qualify as a past enjoyment, which is why it's a bit unusual use of the word here. So basically, listening to past enjoyments is saying to the spiritual world, I'm like the bad kid at the back of class. I haven't really been paying attention to everything you've been showing me. I've been talking to my friends and not really listening to the teacher. And now I'm going to actually try and sit at the front of the class and pay attention. And so what you do is you actually take a memory. It can be anything for this exercise, literally anything. The last time you washed the dishes, walking the dog, talking to your friend, anything that you can remember. And what you do is you live it through, but this time you try to listen through the experience to some aspect of it that you didn't really pay attention to when you first had the experience. And you can literally do this with anything. If you do, you will start to find in these moments that your experience will give to you little bits of information, or there will be things that were on the border of your consciousness when you had the experience that now become clearer. Let me give you a couple of examples. My wife and I took a long walk in Nova Scotia down this spit that led out to a place where two rivers joined, and then the rivers went on into flow into the ocean. And at the time, it was a long walk. She's in much better shape than I was. My feet were hurting. I was very glad when we finally got to the lookout point. The lookout point was maybe 200 meters above the water below, and there was a sheer cliff, and there was no fences, and there were all sorts of families and kids and dogs, and part of me was freaked out that somebody was going to fall. Nobody did. Everybody was sitting down having their lunch. I was looking at what kind of sandwiches my wife had made, very happy to see what she had made for lunch. This is what was going on for me at the time. When I went back to the experience afterwards and lived it through a number of times, I became aware of the fact that really at the very borders of my consciousness, I was aware that there was a presence, a being in the mist that arose above where the two rivers met. And this was something that you could say was almost like something you overheard with somebody walking by. It was there in my consciousness, but I hadn't paid any attention to it, not any real attention to it. And having been able to become aware of it in the memory, it awakens the capacity to have similar experiences more easily. So there's something about listening to your past enjoyments in a kind of reverential way, as if you could say to the world, I may have missed something here, so let's go through it again and see if you can tell me something about it. Another group of examples, I for a while did just the taste of fruit. I'm literally, you can do this exercise with anything. So what does a banana taste like? Remember that. What does an orange taste like that? Remember that. What does an apple taste like that? And I would, for many days in a row, just meditating on remembering the taste of different fruits. And again, not trying to stop myself at that in the enjoyment of that, but listening through the enjoyment to anything else that might come from that. I learned all sorts of things about how the palate works, about the different acidity levels in different fruits and how that affects taste, et cetera, et cetera. But once in a while, when you're doing this meditation, something will get whispered into your inner ear, and it comes with a moment of surprise. So I was remembering what strawberries tasted like. And in my inner ear, the thought was whispered, strawberries are a very unusual fruit because the seed is on the outside, not the inside. Now, for the life of me, I'd never thought of that before. And I'm waiting to hear more about the secret of strawberries. I haven't heard anything else since then. But you will get little snippets, little secrets about the world whispered into your inner ear, as well as various other things that happened in your experience that you didn't actually pay attention to. So, how long have we got tonight? It's 5 to 11 where I am.
You can do, we go till 9:30, which would be 12:30 for you.
Okay. Let me talk about one other core meditation that is really critical for the meditant finding his or her feet on the path. And this one's called listening or seeing yourself as a stranger. In Knowledge of the Higher World, Steiner talks about setting aside moments of inner tranquility during which time you can distinguish between the eternally valuable from the transitory and insignificant. And to call these moments of tranquility is very interesting because what you do in this meditation is something that doesn't often lead you feeling tranquil. What you have to do in this meditation, and it's not easy, is you have to take some memory in your mind, something that you remember well enough, and push it outside of yourself so you can view it as if it were happening to a stranger. This is a kind of, I don't know if any of you ever learned how to do like a somersault where you jump and you land on your feet again without, not like a cartwheel, but like right over. It's a very strange experience. And when your body gets it, you think, oh, that's how to do this. And then you can do it more easily. But until you do it for the first time successfully, it's kind of like, I'm not sure I'm doing this right. This meditation's a bit like that. You have to learn how to disconnect, almost disassociate from something that happened to you so that you can see it happening to this other person. And you are in the position of the omniscient narrator when you do this. An omniscient narrator in a novel can say, George was walking down the street and he was upset about this, that, or the other thing, and he decided to sit down at the bench and he was thinking so and so. So the narrator can describe George to you and what George is doing, but he can also tell you what George is thinking and feeling. That's the omniscient narrator position. With your own memories, you are in the omniscient narrator position. The hard part is to separate it from yourself. So there's Robert McKay. He's going up in the elevator to go for a job interview. He's wearing his best suit at the time. Now, I don't remember what my suit was at the time, right? So there's aspects of this that you have to fill in the details. It's the narrative core that's most important. He's going up to do this job interview. He sits down. He's nervous as anything, but he's trying to do a good job at the interview. And he gets a question that is something that he actually hasn't done, but in terms of his experience. But he has the feeling like if he doesn't answer this question positively, he's not going to be successful at the interview. So he lies, full on makes stuff up, not accentuates something or elaborates, but blatantly lies. Now, when I went back and did Seeing Yourself as a Stranger with this experience, I was shocked. I was quite surprised to watch myself fabricate something this completely. Now, this is a long time ago. I was 24 at the time. But what happens when you push something outside of yourself is you're separating off your immortal I am from the conditions of your current incarnation. Now, this is not easy to do, to see it over there as somebody who's not you anymore, right? You're over here thinking and feeling, and you're watching this person do this thing and have the thoughts and feelings that they have. Because you're in the omniscient narrator position, you know. but that's not you anymore. That's somebody else. And when you get that split, it opens up a very unusual space in your soul. Because you have split off an aspect of your current incarnation from your immortal I am, your higher self has a kind of access to you that is very unusual. I would say if you can pull this off, you will be in the position of what I would call a divine therapist. And this divine therapist has two qualities. Number one, it will not let you get away with any bullshit whatsoever. You are going to see who you really are, and sometimes it sucks. But on the other hand, there's a kind of infinite compassion for you that comes along with this uncompromising gaze. So now, it didn't happen the first time I did this meditation. The first time this meditation, I was just ashamed of myself. But after I did it 3 or 4 times, again, pushing the whole experience outside of myself, watching it as if it were like a movie, but knowing what the person I'm watching was thinking and feeling and going through the whole thing, what became clear to me was how frightened that young man was. He had just conceived a child. The child was not yet born. His wife was going to have to not work anymore, or his future wife was not going to have to work anymore. And he didn't know whether he would get another job or not. Now, he lived in a huge city, so the fact that he had the thought that this is the only job I could get was kind of ridiculous. But under the pressure of that kind of illogical thought and the fear that he was having about the new life he was about to enter into, his moral compass was smashed to pieces, right? It was the pressure of what he was under that meant he wasn't able to sustain what would normally be his, reasonably decent moral self. And all of that was shown to me through this meditation. And so then you begin to see who you really are in a way. Now, this meditation also has two sides. When you can push something outside of yourself and see yourself, you will have these moments of insight. Uh, when Rudolf Steiner calls it moments of inner tranquility, I think, man, every time I've done this meditation, I've more or less been happy or sad. Like I wasn't tranquil, that's for sure. But the tranquility does come from this. What comes is after you do the meditation over and over and over with the same thing, something changes in you. Now, I worked as a therapist for maybe 25 years, and I studied all the different approaches to psychotherapy, or at least most of them, from cognitive behavior through to psychodynamic, through to Jungian, to you name it. I have never seen anything that changes a human being as fast as this meditation. What happens is when you're in a situation again that is similar to the situation that you studied, you'll experience a new facet of yourself. Rudolf Steiner gives an example in Knowledge of the Higher Worlds that I suspect came from him, although he doesn't say so. He gives the example of somebody who is left waiting at a meeting and spends 5 minutes in useless expressions of frustration. George didn't show up when he was supposed to again. God damn, this guy always keeps me waiting. So then he does this meditation, seeing himself as a stranger, watching himself, do these useless expressions of frustration. The next time George, and recognizing that he could have used that 5 minutes for something useful. And I think in a life as busy as Rudolf Steiner's, 5 minutes mattered. So the next time he's in a situation where George keeps him waiting, he no longer has the expression of frustration come up in him. It literally doesn't show up anymore. What shows up is the fact that, I have 5 minutes to do something useful. So for me, exploring that under certain pressures, I can lose my way morally, becomes something that the next time I'm in a position like that, I have a kind of now warning system. Rob, you're under pressure. Be careful, right? Be careful. You are in the kind of pressure that can cause you to stray off being the man you want to be. Be careful. Now, maybe that's not as complete a solution as what Rudolf Steiner experienced with being kept waiting, but I think it's a useful example of this meditation. As I said before, I've never seen anything that changes people as quickly and as profoundly as this meditation. Okay, so I'm going to read you a kind of a longish quote that has to do with understanding what it means to pay attention to the environment in which you are doing the meditative work. This goes back to the issue of the fact that we're living in disturbing times, and that somebody who wants to pursue the meditative path has to take account of the disturbances that they're encountering and try to counteract them in various ways. Steiner gives some suggestions about how to do that in this passage. Something here may be said concerning the environment in which this training should be undertaken, for this is not without some importance. And yet the case differs for almost every person. Anyone practicing in an environment filled only with self-seeking interests, as for example the modern struggle for existence, must be conscious of the fact that these interests are not without their effect on the development of his spiritual organs. It is true that the inner laws of these organs are so powerful that this influence cannot be fatally injurious. Just as a lily can never grow into a thistle, however inappropriate its environment, so too the eye of the soul can never grow to anything but its destined shape, even though it be subjected to the self-seeking interests of modern cities. But under all circumstances, it is well if the student seeks now and again his environment in restful peace, the inner dignity and sweetness of nature. Especially fortunate is the student who can carry out his esoteric training surrounded by the green world of plants or among the sunny hills where nature weaves her web of sweet simplicity. This environment develops the inner organs in a harmony which can never ensue in a modern city. More favorably situated than the townsman is the person who, during his childhood at least, had been able to breathe the fragrance of pines, to gaze on snowy peaks, and observe the silent activity of woodland creatures and insects. Yet no city dweller should fail to give to the organs of his soul and spirit as they develop the nurture that comes from the inspired teachings of spiritual research. If our eyes cannot follow the woods in their mantle of green every spring, day by day, we should instead open our soul to the glorious teachings of the Bhagavad Gita, or St. John's Gospel, or of St. Thomas à Kempis, and to the descriptions resulting from spiritual science. There are many ways to the summit of insight, but much depends on the right choice. The spiritually experienced could say much concerning these paths, much that might seem strange to the uninitiated. Someone, for instance, might be very far in advanced on the path. He might be standing, so to speak, at the very entrance of sight and hearing with soul and spirit. He is then fortunate enough to make a journey over the calm or maybe tempestuous ocean, and a veil falls away from his eyes of soul. Suddenly he becomes a seer. Another is so far advanced that this veil only needs to be loosened. This occurs through some stroke of destiny. On another, this stroke might well have had the effect of paralyzing his powers and undermining his energy. For the esoteric student, it becomes the occasion of his enlightenment. A third perseveres patiently for years without any marked results. Suddenly, while seated silently in his quiet chamber, spiritual light envelops him, the walls disappear, become transparent for his soul, and a new world expands before his eyes that have become seeing, or resounds in his ears that have become spiritually hearing. When I read that paragraph, one of the things that comes to my mind is the individual nature that the path has for each of us, and how we have to be mindful in terms of the work that we're doing to counterbalance the influences of the culture around us in order to give ourselves the right kind of inner world. And so he talks in this passage about opening ourselves up to inspired readings if you're living in a city, but also suggests we spend time in nature. I suspect he also could have, talked about artistic activity in a similar way, and could have also talked about the fundamental meditations that we went through in a similar way. for all of these things have the effect of enabling us to create a sufficient calm in our inner life that we can make progress on the path. Well, I'd like to pause there and see if there's any questions. And then if there's time, maybe we'll do one quick exercise together.
When it comes to studying anthroposophy, I was so fortunate for more than 20 years to live right there in Fair Oaks, where there were study groups each week. I find the best way for me to study is in study groups, but
Did you say but? The best way for you to study is in study groups, but, or was that the end of the sentence?
We're not hearing you, Helena. I think something must have happened to her sound.
Did anybody else hear her say but?
Yes.
Okay. Study groups are certainly wonderful.
I think
I'm
you had more
curious
to
what was
say,
going to
but
follow the but.
yeah, I think something else was coming, but something happened there.
Well, Helena, if you can speak again, we'd love to hear the rest of that thought. Does anybody else have anything they want to contribute or comment on? Anything, any reaction you had while I was speaking?
Yeah, I would. Um, just real briefly, I've been following these Monks Walk for Peace, and they sometimes gave a talk to the people they were with, and I saw a few instances of that. And the thing that they were focused on was that you have the gift of inner peace in you, but you have to awaken it. You have to recognize it and accept it and try to live in it. And this is not just important for your own serenity. What's important about it is it enables you to view others very differently, not as a threat, but as another struggling human being. And it changes all your relationships. And it's an inner thing that changes the world around you from your perspective. And it's so much reinforces exactly what you've been talking about. I just wanted to thank you for making that deeper and wider than I did first time around. Thank you.
You bet. Sounds like a beautiful practice to me. There's a great deal in Buddhism that is so beautiful.
I have a question, and it's when you have this omniscient author, have you ever done this exercise by taking yourself and putting yourself on a stage as an actor, and then being the director sitting in the audience and working through these two different consciousnesses? Because that's how I use this, and it's amazing how it is therapeutic. It just immediately becomes therapy. Whereas I don't usually look at a novel as offering me much along those lines, but I look upon a stage as always offering me a therapeutic moment, even as an audience. So I wonder if you've ever done that.
No, I haven't. And I certainly wouldn't want to suggest there's anything wrong in doing that. I think it's a kind of, from my therapeutic training, a kind of theater of the mind that can be very useful. I think it's important to distinguish that activity, which, as I said, can be very useful and very helpful for somebody, from this particular meditation. The core aspect of this particular meditation involves taking a particular memory, something that actually happened to you or that you were engaged in, and pushing it outside of yourself so you see it as if it happened to a stranger. And when you do that, you open up this space between your immortal I am and the conditions of your current incarnation. And that seems to be what is required to invite this kind of higher order insight into those moments.
Right.
But not to say that, working the way you were describing can be a very creative thing for a person to do.
I
And
think
can
it
really help
actually,
them
yeah,
expand the repertoire of their human being, as it were.
and to look at themselves and
Yeah.
to let any sort of change that would come in out of the novel putting yourself there. It actually makes it more immediate in a sense and less arbitrary. So that's how I live with it, and it's really, yeah, quite
Yeah,
useful.
it sounds like a very creative practice.
Yeah. Thank you.
You bet. Well, let's take a couple of minutes to do an exercise then. So, what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to remember a moment where you really were admiring something or respecting something or had a sense of veneration for something. And ideally, this would be something where you could see the spirit of truth shining through another human being or somebody's capacity. If you really can't find something where you were admiring someone else, you could think of a time when you were awestruck by the beauty of nature. That's sort of a kissing cousin to this experience. But better if you can find something where you're actually admiring truth or knowledge as it existed coming through another person. So take a couple of minutes. We're going to share this experience. So think about something you're comfortable sharing. And then we'll break into groups and you can share one-on-one with each other. This exercise, one of the things about it that people sometimes don't recognize is that the higher levels of being are completely dependent in various ways on the lower levels of being. So to be a human being in this form, we're completely dependent on the material kingdom, the plant kingdom, and to some degree the animal kingdom. If animals weren't doing what they were doing, we wouldn't have the ecosystems which are required for life. So in a very real way, a human being is dependent on the animal, the plant, and the mineral kingdom. What's not so clear is that the higher orders of being, even though they're infinitely more powerful than we are, depend on us. One of the things that Steiner wrote about was that angels look to human beings for a certain kind of nutrition. And in particular, when a human heart expresses reverence or admiration or devotion or respect for the spirit of truth as it shines through other human activity, that becomes nourishment for the angels. So you all just offered up a banquet to the angels. Some of you may experience something in your dreams as a result of that.
So good we can be of service.
How nice.
Absolutely.